My family held my funeral on a Sunday afternoon in October. I found out about it 11 days later, standing in a hospital break room 400 miles away, alive, in scrubs, halfway through a 12-hour shift. I'm Claire Hensley, 41, a travel nurse. For 9 years, my job has been walking into hospitals that are short-staffed and drowning, doing the work nobody else wants, and moving on before anyone learns my coffee order. It's a strange way to live. But when your own family teaches you early and often that you are easy to erase, you learn to travel light. I just never imagined they'd erase me on paper. The message came from my cousin Donna, a number I hadn't seen in years. 7 words. "Why was the casket empty at your funeral?" I read it 4 times. Then I sat down on a plastic chair next to a vending machine, and I felt the floor tilt. Not because I was confused, but because some quiet part of me, the part that had watched my family my whole life, understood immediately that this was not a mistake. 3 weeks later, in a probate courtroom, a judge would slide a single document across his desk, look at my mother over his glasses, and ask her one question. Just one. And I watched 40 years of her confidence drain out of her face in about 6 seconds. But what I did in the parking lot afterward, the thing nobody in that courtroom saw coming, that's the part of this story my family still can't talk about. Welcome back to Quiet Family Justice, where the relatives who bury a quiet woman on paper always forget one thing. Paper leaves a trail. If a story has ever made you stop what you're doing, drop a comment below and subscribe, because this one turns on a single signature. Stay with me. To understand how a living woman ends up with a death certificate, you have to understand my family's arithmetic. In the Hensley house, there was exactly one child who counted, and it was never me. My younger brother, Grant, was the son. I was weather, something you mention, complain about, and forget. I paid for my own nursing school working nights at a gas station. Grant totaled 2 cars before he was 20, and my parents called it finding himself. When my grandmother got sick, I was the one who drove down every other weekend to manage her medications because I was the only one who could read the charts. My mother called those visits showing off. The break came 12 years ago at Thanksgiving over something that sounds small when I say it out loud. Grandma Ruth announced in front of everyone that she was leaving her lake house to me. Not to the family. To me. Because, she said, tapping her fork on the table, Claire is the only one who shows up when there's nothing to inherit. My mother laughed like it was a joke. Grandma Ruth did not laugh. The drive home that night was the last time I spoke to my parents. There was no screaming. That's the part people never believe. My mother simply looked at me in the driveway and said, "You've always known how to work an old woman." Then she got in her car. 12 years of silence. I sent cards the first 2 years. They came back unopened. So I did what travel nurses do best. I disappeared. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that 11 months ago, Grandma Ruth had died. And at the reading of her will, my family had run into a problem with my name on it. I called Donna back on my lunch break, standing in a stairwell that smelled like disinfectant, because I didn't trust my face in front of coworkers. She picked up on the first ring. "Claire? Oh my God, it's really you." "Dana." "What funeral?" There was a long pause. The kind of pause people take when they realize they're about to rearrange someone's entire world. "Claire, your funeral 3 weeks ago at Grace Methodist. There were flowers, a slideshow. Your mother wore black and cried through the whole service. Claire, there was a casket." I looked down at my own hands, working hands. A nurse's hands, with a bandage on one knuckle from a supply cabinet that morning, very much alive. "Dana," I said slowly, "what did they say happened to me?" "A car accident, out of state. They said it was quick, that you didn't suffer. They said the family had already handled everything privately. The cremation, all of it. That's why the casket was closed. Claire, they printed programs. Your face was on the front. Your mother read a poem. A poem? My mother had not called me in 12 years, but she had read a poem. Here's what you should know about me. When something breaks in front of a nurse, we don't scream. We triage. Some cold, practical part of my brain stepped forward, the same part that takes over when a patient codes. And it started asking questions in a voice that didn't shake. Dana, why is everyone only finding out now that it wasn't real? Because of me, she said. I couldn't let it go. Something felt wrong the whole time. Nobody had details. Nobody knew which hospital, which state, where the accident report was. When I asked your brother, Grant got weird, defensive. He told me to let the family grieve in peace. And then last week I found your nursing license online, Claire. Renewed 2 months ago. Dead women don't renew their licenses. So I texted you. I remember pressing my back against the cold stairwell wall and sliding down until I was sitting on the steps, phone against my ear, listening to my heart do something unprofessional. Dana, one more question. I closed my eyes. Did anyone mention Grandma Ruth's estate? The pause on the line was longer this time, and when she spoke again, her voice had dropped to a whisper as if the walls of her own house couldn't be trusted. The lake house went up for sale 2 weeks after your funeral. Claire, they're saying the paperwork is almost done. Your share of everything, the house, the accounts, all of it, it defaulted to your parents because you're dead. There it was, the arithmetic. Grandma Ruth had left me the lake house 11 months ago, and my family had found a way to inherit it anyway. Not by fighting the will, not by hiring lawyers, not by calling me and asking, by burying me. I thanked Dana. I told her not to tell anyone we'd spoken, not yet. And then I sat alone in that stairwell for exactly 10 minutes. I watched them tick by on my watch, and I let myself feel all of it. The grief, the rage, the strange floating unreality of being mourned by people who knew exactly where I wasn't. 10 minutes. That's what I gave it. Then I stood up, smoothed my scrubs, finished my shift, and went home to my rented apartment. And I did what I have done my whole quiet life while everyone else was performing their feelings. I started making a list. Because here's the thing about declaring a nurse dead. We spend our entire careers around death certificates. We know exactly what they're supposed to look like. And we know exactly who signs them. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I did something I don't recommend to anyone. I researched my own death. It started with the funeral home's website. Grace Methodist doesn't post services, but the funeral home does. A tribute page, they call it. And there it was, between an 80-year-old veteran and someone's beloved aunt. My name, my dates, my face. The photo they'd chosen was from my nursing school graduation, 20 years old, scanned badly, the edges still showing the album's plastic sleeve. I stared at it for a long time. Of all the things that hurt that night, and everything hurt that night, that photo was the sharpest, because it proved they didn't have a single recent picture of me. They had mourned a version of me that stopped existing in their house 2 decades ago. There was a guest book on the page, 41 entries. I read every single one. Old neighbors, a high school teacher who wrote that I'd been a gentle, serious girl, cousins, family friends. People wrote things like, "Heaven gained an angel," and "She's at peace now." An aunt I barely knew wrote, "She had a difficult path, but she's home now." A difficult path. That's what my 12 years of silence had become in the family's official story. Not an exile they created, but a wandering they forgave. And then, at the bottom, the entry that made me stop breathing for a second. From my mother. My beautiful daughter, I only wish we'd had more time. A mother's love never dies. 62 people had liked it. I want to be honest about what happened next, because this story isn't about a woman made of steel. I closed the laptop, walked into the bathroom of my small rented apartment, and I cried in the shower until the water went cold. Not because I missed them, because for one horrible hour I saw the world they had built, a world where they were the grieving parents of a tragic daughter, collecting sympathy casseroles and inheritance paperwork in the same 2 weeks. And I understood that this world worked better for them than the one where I was alive. My death was not a lie they told. It was a product they built, and business was good. The slideshow was on the tribute page, too. I made myself watch it. Photos of me as a baby. Me at 7, on Grandma Ruth's dock at the lake house, holding a fish and grinning with missing teeth. Me at Christmas, maybe 10, sitting slightly apart from Grant, already learning my place in the frame. The slideshow ended at my graduation photo. According to my family's version of my life, nothing happened after 21. 20 years of night shifts, of holding dying strangers' hands, of becoming someone. None of it existed. I was a child, and then I was a tragedy. Somewhere around 3 a.m, the crying stopped, the nurse came back, and I noticed the detail that changed everything. The tribute page listed the date of death, March 14th. I scrolled back through my phone. On March 14th, I had worked a double in a cardiac unit. I had the schedule, the badge scans, the charting logs with my electronic signature, time-stamped every 20 minutes for 16 hours. On the day I officially died, I had documented, provable, minute-by-minute evidence that I was alive and saving other people's parents. But that wasn't the detail. The detail was smaller at the bottom of the tribute, in the standard obituary language. So passed away on March 14th, as confirmed by the county registrar. Confirmed. By the county registrar. You cannot hold a legal funeral, close accounts, and transfer an inheritance with a sad story and a poem. Somewhere in some government office, there was a piece of paper, an actual, official, filed death certificate with my name on it. And someone in my family had signed something to make it exist. Tomorrow I was going to find out who. Here is something most people don't know, because most people never need to know it. In my grandmother's state, a death certificate is not a secret. If you're an immediate family member, a parent, a spouse, a child, a sibling, you can walk into the county office, pay a small fee, and order a certified copy. The form does not ask if you are also the deceased. I took 4 days of my accrued leave. I told the charge nurse it was a family matter, which was the truest sentence I'd spoken all week. Then I drove 400 miles back toward a hometown I had spent 12 years avoiding, with a folder on the passenger seat containing my passport, my birth certificate, my nursing license, and 16 hours of badge scans from the day of my death. I checked into a motel 2 towns over, paid cash, and parked around the back. It felt ridiculous, like a spy movie. But some instinct told me that the longer my family believed I was dead, the more they would keep building. And the more they built, the more there would be to fall. The county records office was a beige room with a take-a-number machine and a wall clock 5 minutes slow. I waited behind a man contesting a parking ticket. When my number was called, I walked up to the counter, and a woman with kind eyes and glasses on a chain asked how she could help me. "I need a certified copy of a death certificate," I said. "The name is Claire Hensley," she typed. I watched her face. I've spent 20 years reading faces over hospital beds, and hers did something interesting. A small pause, a second look at the screen. "And your relationship to the deceased?" I had rehearsed this moment the entire drive. I'd imagined saying something cinematic. Instead, I heard myself say very quietly, "That's what I need to find out." Because I'm her. I slid my passport across the counter, then my license. Then, because her face had gone very still, my hospital badge. To her enormous credit, she did not scream, laugh, or call security. She looked at the passport, looked at me, looked back at the screen, and then said, in the exact careful voice I use to tell families difficult news, "Ma'am, I think you should sit down while I get my supervisor." Her supervisor was a heavyset man named Mr. Okafor, who had worked in vital records for 19 years and had, in his words, seen almost everything. Almost. He brought me into a small side office, verified my documents twice, took a photocopy of everything, and then turned his monitor toward me. "Miss Hensley," he said, "according to the state, you died on March 14th. And there it was. My death certificate, filed, stamped, official. I made myself read it the way I would read a patient's chart, top to bottom, no skipping. Name correct, date of birth correct, place of death, a private residence, cause of death listed in the medical section, and then the two boxes that mattered more than everything else on the page. The certifying physician, a name I had never heard of, from a clinic I couldn't find with a license number, and the informant, the family member who provides the personal information, who attests to the facts, whose signature sits at the bottom of the document like an anchor, Margaret Hensley, relationship mother, my mother's handwriting. I would know it anywhere. The same handwriting that signed my grade school permission slips, the same handwriting on the last birthday card I ever got from her when I turned 29, 13 years ago. Mr. Okafor was watching me. "Ma'am," he said gently, "I have to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully. Before we start the process on our end, is there anyone in your family you'd like to call first? Sometimes these things are misunderstandings." I looked at my mother's signature for a long moment. "No," I said, "there's no misunderstanding. And I'd like to ask you something instead. What happens to this document now?" What he told me next changed my entire plan. What Mr. Okafor told me was this: the moment I proved I was alive, the state would begin the process of voiding the certificate. A fraudulent death record is a serious matter. The registrar's office would open a case, notify the state health department, and eventually the whole thing would be corrected. "Eventually," I repeated. "These things take time," he said. "Weeks, sometimes months. There are verifications, hearings, and in the meantime, the probate case on my grandmother's estate, the one where my share is being transferred because I'm dead. Does that automatically stop?" He hesitated, and in that hesitation, I heard everything. "Not automatically," he admitted. "Probate is a separate court. They'd need to be formally notified. If the estate closes before the correction goes through..." He spread his hands. "Getting property back after distribution is much harder than stopping it before. You'd want a lawyer, ma'am, today, if possible." I asked him for one more thing before I left. Could he tell me anything about the certifying physician? He looked at the name, and his frown deepened in a way I recognized. The frown of a professional looking at something wrong in his own field. "That's odd," he said. "This certificate was filed on paper. Almost nobody files paper anymore. Everything's electronic. Paper filings get less scrutiny. Someone knew that." He wrote the physician's name and license number on a sticky note and slid it to me. "I can't investigate this, but there's a public database where anyone can verify a medical license. Anyone. You understand?" I understood. That night, in my motel room, I sat cross-legged on the bed with my laptop, a gas station sandwich, and the sticky note. I typed the license number into the State Medical Board's public lookup. No results found. I tried the name. There was a physician by that name, retired 11 years ago in a different part of the state, a man who would now be nearly 90. I searched further and found a small memorial notice from a regional medical society newsletter. The doctor whose name certified my death had himself died 6 years ago. A dead doctor had pronounced me dead. I sat back against the motel headboard and let that sink in, because it told me something important about my family, something that shifted this whole story from cruel to criminal. Signing a false statement as an informant, maybe my mother could one day cry in front of a judge and call it grief-induced confusion. But someone had gone further. Someone had found the name of a dead physician, invented a license number close enough to look real, and forged a medical certification on a government document. That is not confusion. That is research. That is planning. That is a person sitting at a kitchen table, practicing a dead man's signature. And I knew, the way you know things about people you grew up with, exactly whose style this was. My mother provides the performance. She reads the poem. She wears the black. But the paperwork, the details, the handled privately cremation story that conveniently explained the closed casket, Grant. My brother had a gift for paperwork. He'd been a loan officer for years, the kind of job where you learn exactly which documents get checked and which ones just get filed. I opened a new folder on my laptop and named it what I'd been calling it in my head all day, Lazarus. Into it went photographs of the death certificate, the license lookup results, the retired doctor's memorial notice, my badge scans, my work schedule, and screenshots of the entire tribute page. Every guest book entry, every photo, my mother's comment with its 62 likes. 2 hours of quiet, methodical work. Nurses chart everything. It's how we survive lawyers. And speaking of lawyers, at 9 the next morning, I was going to be sitting across from one. Not just any lawyer. There was exactly one person in that town I trusted with this, and she happened to be the same woman who had drafted Grandma Ruth's will. If anyone knew what my family had been doing for 11 months, it was her. Eleanor Voss had been my grandmother's lawyer for 30 years. I remembered her from the lake house summers. A tall woman who came to dinner once every July, drank exactly 1 glass of wine, and was the only guest Grandma Ruth never interrupted. Her office was above the old pharmacy on Main Street. I hadn't made an appointment. Some part of me was afraid that if I called ahead and said my name, the walls of whatever my family had built would start moving before I got there. Her receptionist asked if I had an appointment. I said, "No, but please tell Miss Voss that Ruth Hensley's granddaughter is here." A minute later, the inner door opened, and Eleanor Voss stood in it, 70 years old and straight as a fence post, looking at me the way you look at weather on the horizon. "Well," she said at last, "you're considerably more alive than I was led to believe." "You heard then." "Ms. Hensley, I was invited." She stepped aside to let me in. I did not attend. "Sit down. I suspect this is going to be a long morning, and I suspect I owe your grandmother my full attention for it." What I learned in the next hour, I'll give you the way she gave it to me, in order and without mercy. First, Grandma Ruth's will had never changed. The lake house and 1/2 of her remaining estate was mine. My mother had contested it after the death, quietly, through a lawyer 2 counties over, arguing that I was estranged, whereabouts unknown, possibly deceased. That phrase had been in a filing 11 months ago. Possibly deceased. They had floated the idea in writing almost a year before they held my funeral. This wasn't a scheme they'd stumbled into. It was a seed they'd planted and watered. Second, the court had required a diligent search for me before anything could move. Notices in newspapers, an affidavit of attempted contact. Eleanor pulled the affidavit from the probate file and turned it toward me. My mother had sworn under oath that the family had exhausted all reasonable efforts to locate me. On the list of efforts, letters to a 15-year-old address, calls to a phone number I'd never owned, and an inquiry sent to a hospital I had never worked at. Meanwhile, I said, my nursing license, my address, and my employer are in a public state database. It takes 90 seconds. I know, Eleanor said, which is why I flagged it. I sent 2 letters to the court expressing concern about the sufficiency of the search, and then, 3 months ago, everything stopped mattering. Because your family produced something better than a missing heir. She looked at me over her glasses. A dead one. The death certificate had arrived in the probate case like a trump card. Contest over. The estate began its final procedures, my share redirected by law toward my parents. The lake house listed for sale. Closing scheduled. When? I asked. The final distribution hearing is in 19 days. Eleanor folded her hands. Now. I am going to ask you a question, Claire, and I want you to take your time. You have 2 roads. Road 1, we notify the court today that you're alive, the fraud collapses immediately, and your family gets 19 days to prepare their tears and their explanations. Road 2, she paused, and something old and sharp moved behind her eyes. We spend those 19 days quietly assembling every document, every lie, and every signature into a file. No explanation can survive. We notify the court properly, through the correct legal channels, at the correct time. And your family walks into that hearing expecting to collect an inheritance, with no idea what's waiting for them. She slid a legal pad across the desk. Your grandmother, she added quietly, was my friend for 30 years. She used to say you were the only one in that family who understood that patience is not weakness. Prove her right. I picked up the pen. Here is what 19 days of quiet preparation looks like. Eleanor filed nothing at first. Instead, she made requests, the boring, procedural kind that don't alert anyone. Certified copies of the entire probate file, the affidavit of diligent search, the death certificate as submitted to the court, which mattered enormously because it let us compare it against the version filed with the county. If anything didn't match, that was another nail. My job was different. My job was to become the most documented living person in the state. Day 1, Eleanor sent me to a notary with a sworn declaration of identity. Day 2, I stood in front of a judge's clerk in a neighboring county, far from anyone who might know my family, and had my fingerprints taken, then matched against the prints from my nursing license file. Day 3, we collected 16 hours of badge scans, shift charts, and pharmacy logs from March 14th, each page certified by my hospital's records custodian, who told Eleanor on the phone that this was the strangest records request of her career, and she once had to certify that a patient was bitten by an emu. I laughed for the first time in 2 weeks. Then I went back to work because the folder wasn't finished. We found the funeral home's paperwork. This part still amazes me. To hold a funeral, the home had required a copy of the death certificate, which my mother provided, but for the cremation story, the handled privately out of state explanation, there was no paperwork at all, because there was no cremation, because there was no body, because I was standing in a records office 400 miles away renewing my parking permit. The funeral director, when Eleanor called him with careful questions, went very quiet and then said he would be consulting his own attorney. Good, Eleanor said. Consult away. We found the real estate listing for the lake house. Then the purchase offer, accepted pending the estate's closing. The buyers had children. Somewhere out there was a family planning summers on my grandmother's dock, and they had no idea their sale document chain began with a forged signature from a doctor 6 years in his grave. Eleanor made sure their agent would be notified through proper channels at the proper time. Innocent people were not going to be casualties of this. And then there was the part I did alone, at night, in my motel room, because no one could do it for me. I wrote down everything I remembered, every Thanksgiving. The birthday card at 29, the last one. The exact words in the driveway 12 years ago. Grandma Ruth's voice saying the only one who shows up when there's nothing to inherit. Eleanor said personal history could matter if the family claimed this was all grief and confusion. A pattern is a pattern. So I built the pattern in Nurse's handwriting, date by date, 20 years of being weather. Somewhere around day 6, I noticed something about myself. My hands weren't shaking. They hadn't shaken once. Not at the records office, not at the notary, not reading my mother's poem comment for the 40th time. 12 years of night shifts teach your body a strange gift. The worse things get, the steadier you become. My family had spent my whole life mistaking that steadiness for emptiness, for being a doormat, a ghost, weather. In 19 days, in a courtroom, they were finally going to learn what it actually was. But on day 9, Dana called me at 11 at night, whispering, and the plan nearly ended before it began. "Claire," she said, "I think they know." "Define know," I said, already sitting up, already reaching for the light. Tonight at Sunday dinner, Grant was on his laptop and suddenly he goes, "That's weird. Someone requested certified copies from the probate file." He has one of those alert things on the case. Of course he does. "And your mom got this look, Claire, this flat look." And she goes, "Probably the buyer's title company." And Grant goes, "Probably." But then Dana's voice dropped lower. Then he asked me why I'd been so quiet lately. My heart was doing something I wouldn't have charted as normal. "What did you say?" I said work was killing me, which is true. "Claire, I don't think I'm built for this." He kept looking at me. I closed my eyes and thought about triage. When a situation starts collapsing, you don't handle everything. You handle the thing that kills you first. "Dana, listen to me. You've done nothing wrong, and you know nothing. From this second, that's not a story. It's the truth. Delete our texts. If you don't hear from me, that's good news. And Dana, thank you. You're the only reason I'm not legally a ghost." The next morning, Eleanor was less alarmed than I expected, and more careful. "A records request is noise," she said. "Title companies, appraisers, creditors, probate files get pulled constantly. He suspects nothing specific, but we adjust." From then on, everything went through channels with no alerts attached, and I stopped driving past anywhere with a Hensley in it, which in that town was a meaningful restriction. And then, on day 13, the universe tested us properly. I was in the grocery store 2 towns over. 2 towns I'd been so careful, standing in the cereal aisle like an ordinary living woman, when I heard a cart stop behind me, and a voice I hadn't heard in 12 years said, "Claire?" Aunt Patty, my father's sister, 68 years old, holding a box of bran flakes, staring at me with a face draining toward the color of the linoleum. In the movie version of my life, I turn slowly and deliver a devastating line. In the actual version, I did something I'd rehearsed with Eleanor for exactly this scenario, because Eleanor has been a small-town lawyer for 40 years and plans for grocery stores. I looked at her with polite, mild confusion. "I'm sorry?" Patty's hand went to her chest. "You look exactly like my niece. Exactly. She passed away this spring." "Oh," I said gently, in the voice I use with disoriented patients at 3 a.m. "I'm so sorry for your loss." And I put my basket down, and I walked, unhurried, a stranger with somewhere ordinary to be, out of the store, into my car, around the corner, where I gripped the wheel and breathed like I'd run a mile. My phone buzzed that night. "Dana." Patty's telling everyone she saw your double at the Kroger in Milford. Your mom told her she needs to get her cataracts done. Grant didn't say anything at all. He just went quiet. Grant went quiet. Of everything in that message, that was the sentence that scared me, because I knew my brother, and my brother did his real thinking in silence, the same way I did. We were, in that one way, the same animal. 6 days left. The folder was nearly complete. Eleanor had drafted the emergency motion, ready to file at the precise legal moment. Everything was on rails. So, of course, on day 16, Eleanor called me into her office, set a document on the desk, and said the sentence I'll remember the rest of my life. Claire, they've made a mistake. A big one. And it changes what happens in that courtroom. The document on Eleanor's desk was a supplemental filing from my mother's lawyer submitted 2 days earlier. Routine on its surface, the final accounting of the estate before distribution, assets, debts, values. The kind of paperwork nobody reads. Eleanor reads everything. "Look at the signature page," she said. "Not your mother's, the witness attestation." I looked, and even I, a nurse and not a lawyer, saw it in about 4 seconds, because I had spent 19 days staring at one particular piece of handwriting. The final accounting required a disinterested witness. The name printed there was a neighbor of my parents, but the signature, the actual loops and slants of the ink, I had seen that handwriting before, on a death certificate. In the box for the certifying physician, the dead doctor and my parents' 70-year-old neighbor apparently shared the exact same handwriting, the same odd flat-topped R, the same impatient little hook at the end. Grant hadn't just forged one signature 11 months ago. Forging had become his tool, the thing you reach for once it works. And he'd gotten comfortable. Comfortable people repeat themselves. A document examiner will conclude in an afternoon that these were written by the same hand, Eleanor said. Which means the fraud is no longer one old document from months ago that your mother can cry about. It is a live pattern, continuing into filings made this week, in front of this judge. She took her glasses off. Claire, courts hate being lied to about the past. But what they truly cannot forgive is being lied to in the present tense. She laid out the final plan, and it was surgical. The emergency motion, my declaration, the fingerprint match, the badge scans, the void certificate evidence, the medical board lookup, the memorial notice for the dead doctor, and now the handwriting comparison, would be filed under seal, directly to the judge, the afternoon before the hearing. Not weeks before, when my family's lawyer could withdraw filings, request delays, build a story. The night before. Long enough for the judge to read every page, too late for anyone to run. And your family, Eleanor said, will walk in expecting a 15-minute rubber stamp. The night before the hearing, I didn't sleep, and I didn't try. I sat by the motel window with gas station coffee, and I thought about Grandma Ruth's doc, being 7, holding a fish, grinning at whoever held the camera. Someone in my family had chosen that photo for the funeral slideshow. Someone had scrolled through an album, seen that happy child, and selected her to decorate the lie. In a few hours, I was going to find out what all of them looked like when the decoration walked in. The courthouse smelled like every institutional building I've ever worked in. Floor wax and old paper and burnt coffee. Eleanor went in first, alone. That was the choreography. I stayed in a witness room down the hall with a bailiff who knew, because the judge now knew, and the judge had, in Eleanor's words when she stepped out to get me, read all of it twice and moved us to the large courtroom. He wants room? Through the door, faintly, I could hear the hearing begin, the murmur of procedure. My mother's lawyer, a voice full of Friday afternoon confidence, saying words like straightforward and conclude this matter. Then Eleanor's voice, Unhurried. Your Honor, before distribution, there is the matter of the heir presumed deceased. A pause. Papers. My mother's lawyer, less confident. Your Honor, the death of Claire Hensley is a matter of record. And then the judge, quiet and dry. Counsel, it's the record I'd like to discuss. Bailiff. The door opened, 40 faces turned, and I walked into my own estate hearing wearing my grandmother's brooch, past the pews, past Aunt Patty's hand flying to her mouth, past Grant going white in stages, and I watched my mother's black funeral dress turn into a costume in front of the entire room. Here is what a courtroom sounds like when a dead woman walks in. Nothing. Not a gasp. Gasps come later. First, there is a silence so complete you can hear the ventilation system, 40 people simultaneously forgetting how conversation works. I didn't look at my family. Not yet. I walked to Eleanor's table the way I walk into a coding patient's room. Spine straight, steps even, because panic is contagious, and so is calm. I sat. I folded my hands. And only then did I turn my head. My father was gray, not pale, gray, like wet newspaper. Aunt Patty was crying already, one hand pressed to her mouth, and I genuinely felt sorry for her. She'd mourned me twice now, once in a church and once in a cereal aisle. Grant sat perfectly still, the way he'd gone quiet in Dana's message, and I could see the machinery behind his eyes running the same calculation he'd been running his whole life. What do they know? And what can still be managed? And my mother. My mother, in dark gray with a black scarf, half mourning, a costume choice, looked at me with an expression I will spend the rest of my life trying to describe. It wasn't shock. Underneath the widening eyes, underneath the hand rising theatrically to her throat, there was something worse. It was irritation. For one unguarded second, my mother looked at her living daughter the way you look at a problem that was supposed to have been handled. Then the performance arrived, half a beat late. "Claire? Claire? Oh my God!" She rose, arms opening, voice climbing toward the ceiling. "It's a miracle, ma'am." The judge didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Sit down." She sat. The judge was an older man with reading glasses and the unhurried manner of someone who has heard every excuse in the county at least 4 times. He took a document from the folder in front of him. I knew its shape by heart. And he slid it across the desk toward the clerk, who carried it to my mother's table. "Mrs. Hensley," he said, "the court is showing you the certificate of death for Claire Hensley, filed March 21st, submitted to this court as the basis for redirecting her inheritance. At the bottom of that document, there is an informant's attestation, signed under penalty of law." He took off his glasses, and he looked at her over the frame the way I'd imagined for 19 days. Except in my imagination, the room hadn't been this quiet. "My question is simple. Is that your signature?" 6 seconds. I counted them, the way I count respirations. In 6 seconds, my mother's face went through its entire repertoire. The trembling lip, the glance to her lawyer, the half turn toward my father, the mouth opening on some sentence about grief and confusion. And found that none of it worked here, because the question wasn't about feelings. It was about ink, yes or no, her signature or not. 40 years of managing every room she ever entered, and the exit doors had been reduced to 2, and both of them were on fire. She said, we believed in good faith that, Mrs. Hensley, it is a yes or no question?" Her lawyer leaned in, whispered urgently. She pulled her arm away from him, actually pulled it away in front of the judge. And in that gesture, I saw the whole rest of the morning, because my mother had just discovered the one audience she couldn't perform for, and it was breaking something in her in real time. "Yes," she said finally, barely audible. "But—" "Thank you." The judge put his glasses back on. Now we'll discuss the physician's certification on that same document. Counsel, he turned to her lawyer, your client may want to know that the certifying doctor has been deceased for 6 years. The court finds itself curious about who held his pen. And 40 heads, in one motion, turned to look at my brother. What happened over the next hour was not dramatic, and that's exactly why it was devastating. Courtrooms don't collapse like movies. They collapse like paperwork. The judge suspended the distribution, those words first, before anything else, and I watched the lake house sale die in a single sentence. Then, methodically, he walked through the file while my family's lawyer aged in front of us. The affidavit of diligent search, sworn by my mother, alongside a printout showing my license, employer, and city available in a public database, 90 seconds of effort, notarized proof of its absence. The paper filing of the death certificate, chosen, Mr. Okafor's office had confirmed in writing, in a county where paper filings received minimal review. The handwriting on the physician's certification, and then last week's estate accounting, where the same handwriting appeared again in a fresh signature. The mistake, the pattern, fraud in the present tense. Mr. Hensley, the judge said at one point without looking up, you are not required to say anything. In fact, given where this file is going this afternoon, I'd recommend it. Where this file is going? A referral to the district attorney's office? He said it plainly, into the record. Forgery of a vital record, false statements under oath, fraud upon the court. My mother made a sound at that, not a word, just air leaving her, and reached for my father's hand. He moved it away. 39 years of marriage, and he moved his hand, and I understood that my father had spent this last year the way he'd spent his whole life, not asking questions on purpose, and that his bill for it had just arrived too. Grant said nothing. Grant, who had gone quiet on day 13, stayed quiet now, and for the first time in my life I could read my brother completely. He was already looking for the version of this where he'd only helped, where Mom had asked him to, where a good lawyer splits a family down the middle and saves half. He would find, in the coming months, that handwriting doesn't negotiate. Eleanor rose near the end. She didn't gloat either. She was surgical to the last stitch. She entered my declaration, restored me formally as heir, requested the funeral costs be examined since the estate had partially paid for them. My family had used my grandmother's money to bury me. The judge's eyebrows went up a full centimeter, the most emotion he showed all morning. And then the strangest moment of the whole hearing. The judge turned to me. Miss Hensley, you've sat through this proceeding with remarkable composure. Is there anything you wish to say for the record? The whole room waited for the speech. 12 years of exile, a funeral, a poem. The room wanted fire, and I could feel my mother bracing for it, almost wanting it, because a screaming daughter is a scene she knows how to play against. Yes, Your Honor, I said, one correction for the record. The obituary said I passed away peacefully. I looked at my mother for the first time, directly, and I gave her the calm she'd always mistaken for weakness. I want the record to show I was working a double shift in a cardiac unit, keeping other people's parents alive. Nobody made a sound. The judge nodded slowly. So noted. The gavel came down at 11:42 in the morning. The estate was frozen, the referral was made, and my family filed out past me one by one, and not a single one of them could hold my eyes. But my mother was waiting for me in the parking lot. She was standing by my car. She'd asked someone which one was mine, which meant even this was planned. And as I came down the courthouse steps, she arranged her face into the expression I'd seen on the tribute page. Grieving mother, available for reconciliation. Claire. Her voice was soft now, the courtroom edge gone. Sweetheart, what happened in there? You have to understand, it got away from us. Grant handled things I never fully saw, and your father, we thought you were gone. We truly. Claire, I read a poem. I know, I said. 62 likes. She blinked, and then she reached for the last card in her deck, the one that had always, always worked on everyone. I am still your mother. Whatever the lawyers do now, we can face it as a family. That's what Ruth would have wanted. And this is the part of the story my family still can't talk about. I didn't scream. I didn't deliver a speech. I'd already said my sentence for the record, where it counted. Instead, I opened my car, took out a shoebox I had carried 400 miles for exactly this moment, and put it in her hands. She looked at it like it might contain a verdict. In a way, it did. Open it later, I said. It's the birthday cards and the Christmas cards I sent you and Dad for 2 years after you cut me off. All of them returned unopened. You'll notice the postmarks and the yellow forwarding stickers with my addresses on them. Your lawyer is going to ask you how you and Grant searched everywhere and couldn't find me. I got in the car and rolled the window down for the last thing I ever planned to say to her. Tell him the truth, Mom. You didn't lose me. You returned me. There's a difference, and now it's postmarked. I drove away and left her standing in a courthouse parking lot, holding 12 years of proof against herself in a shoebox, and in the rearview mirror I watched her not open it. The rest you can imagine because the system did its slow, grinding work. The certificate was voided. I have the letter. It calls me erroneously registered as deceased, which is one way to put it. The lake house sale was canceled. Eleanor made sure the buyers were released gently. Deposit returned. The referrals became charges by spring. Grant's lawyer is arguing exactly what I predicted. My mother's is arguing grief. The postmarks are not arguing anything. They don't have to, and the lake house is mine. I took a permanent position at a hospital 40 minutes away, the first permanent anything in 9 years. Last month, Dana came up for a weekend, and we sat on Grandma Ruth's dock with coffee, and she asked me if I ever look at the tribute page anymore. It's still up. 41 condolences for a woman who is currently repainting a boathouse. I told her the truth. I look at it once a year. Not for the grief, for the reminder. My family declared me dead because they thought a quiet woman and a gone woman were the same thing. They wrote it down, signed it, filed it, and built a whole new life on top of it. But Grandma Ruth knew, and Eleanor knew, and now 40 people in a courtroom know. Paper doesn't care how quietly you live. Paper only cares what's true, and it keeps everything. They killed me with a signature, and a signature killed them back. If this story made you sit up straighter, tell me in the comments what you would have put in that shoebox. And subscribe to Quiet Family Justice, because next week I have a story about a woman whose family spent 17 years calling her the failure, right up until the night her failed little business bought the building her father worked in. The quiet ones always have the last word. Thanks for listening.